what I will try and do today is give a very brief introduction and not just talk about VR and AR technology and its impact on healthcare, but talk about how it's part of an emergence of other systems such as biosensing, telemedicine, and machine learning, and how together we're going to see some dramatic changes over the next few years in how healthcare is delivered. So let me advance the slide here. Okay, in the course of the next 30 minutes, I'm going to start by giving a brief overview of the context of the digital health revolution that we're in the middle of. I'm going to talk about the emerging and confluent technologies that are contributing to that revolution. I'll try and give a very brief overview of VR and AR technologies, what we are starting to call extended reality technologies or XR technologies. I'll talk a little bit about the neuroscience of why VR AR technology has great impact in healthcare. I'll talk a little bit about the history. There is a history of VR. It's not just something that evolved over the last few years, and how the research that has been done previously contributes to where we are now and gives us a fantastic running start. I'll give some examples of where we are now, and then I'll try and do something perhaps a little bit risky, talk a little bit about the future prospects of where we'll be in a few years. Rob briefly mentioned my academic affiliations with Stanford University. One of the things that empowers my work is I spent some time as the director of the Mind Division for the Stanford Center on Longevity. At that time, I became very aware of the looming healthcare crisis, and I think it'll be more of a challenge than we have with the current pandemic, and that's because of a worldwide aging population. The demographics are such that, well, for example, in the US, our population has doubled since the 1960s, but family sizes have gone down dramatically. As a result, if we look out 5, 10, 15 years from now, we're going to be top heavy. We're going to have a lot of people in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond who will need help with difficult challenges such as stroke, mobility disorders, neurodegenerative disease. And we don't have the infrastructure right now, both physical and also support-wise, to support our aging population. It's a worldwide problem, and we have some time to get ready for it, but it could be an issue that could have dramatic effects upon our economy and our culture if we're not prepared. The only solution, since we can't grow caregivers fast enough, is to leverage technology. And this is one of the reasons that I spend so much time not just working within the academic arena, but working with some amazing early and later stage technology groups and medical product groups to come up with the next wave of technology that can help support our healthcare systems. So to give a very brief summary of what my talk will be about, I'm going to talk about how our current systems have been founded upon more than 30 years of research and development, and how they facilitated us being where we are today, and where our next point of departure is with today's generation technology. What has been amazing is that the cost of VR and AR technology is finally at a point where it's affordable, and we can leverage the technology and place it in such a way as to not just be useful in a clinical environment, but also in the home environment. The full spectrum of healthcare is being impacted by VR and AR technologies, not just direct patient care, but with prevention wellness, improved assessments, and better management of chronic diseases. And we're finally in the position where the technology can move into mainstream. And one of the things I'm so excited about with Hoag and this conference and the people who are listening to this conference and watching it is that we finally are in a position to move from the early stage now. The technology is ready to be moved into healthcare, and Hoag is helping us move that forward. So we are in the middle of a digital health revolution. Things are moving along quite briskly in that area. There's been an additional momentum gathered because of the current pandemic. One amazing aspect of this shift to digital health as a platform for healthcare is now allows us to be more focused on the patient, having the patient be the center of care rather than the clinic or the hospital. We're seeing impact on all aspects of healthcare, starting with prevention and wellness, improved, much more objective assessments of physical and cognitive function, improved functional training using simulations, improved ways to promote adherence so people can have some guidance and help to stay with what's often a difficult healthcare program, and ways to reach underserved populations. In the last 10 to 15 years, it's been quite a transformation. Almost every medical device has been reinvented and moved from the analog world to the digital world. I still remember seeing stacks and stacks of patient records. We now have electronic medical records, which I'm told are actually pretty easy to use, perhaps. And this allows us to do some amazing things. By moving from an analog world to a digital world, we can collect a lot more information and analyze it in a much more robust manner. We're entering the era of medical wearables, where sensors can be affixed to us and collect information about our movement, about the state of hormones, our physical functions can be collected and uploaded to the cloud and analyzed in a protected manner. We have ways to collect this data in a comfortable way with watches and earphones and stickers and headbands that we can wear at night. And it's not just our physical parameters that are being captured with this information. We're also now getting ways to, for example, collect information about brain health by looking at the passive data of how fast we type on our cell phones, or voice stress, voice analytics as a way of indexing anxiety or depression. We'll hear later today from Dr. Naduka about how we can capture information from a head-mount display and use that as a method of indexing emotional valence and mood. And we can capture cognitive functions through a very sophisticated way of measuring movement and response to a challenge, and use that through an augmented reality system. So we're entering a new era of data collection. And this allows us to do some amazing things, and we can combine these digital analytics with standard courses of treatment, standard devices or prescription medicine, and promote combination therapy, which allows us to do so much more in this digital healthcare platform. I can't overstate how amazing it is to be able to collect this information on both an individual and on a population basis, come up with methods to take the information, refine our protocols, use VR, AR, and other systems such as smartphones and tablets as a way to collect information, but also push recommendations and promote adherence and changes of behavior to the user. On the other end of this platform, we have scientists, clinicians, government officials, everyone who has a need to look at a top level of the trends and the challenges that we're facing in our healthcare system at large. Allows us to do some amazing things, to understand things that we never could have visibility on before. This allows us to come up with a precision approach for personalized care management. We have a dynamic longitudinal view of the patient's journey. We can dynamically adjust clinical protocols. Instead of a one-size-fits-all, we can match them to the individual. And we can come up with structured data to support decision support systems. So a clinician has a way to see the patient and how they are and understand some key nodes of change. Where making a change in a protocol or a prescription medicine or a recommended exercise can make a dramatic difference and improve the patient's outcome. We now have the tools to be able to do this, and it's really quite an amazing thing. It gives a data stream for physicians and scientists and others that might have an interest to be able to understand and refine protocols. It's really a full spectrum of care that's being impacted by this digital layer, starting at research, discovery and development, managing supply chains for medical products, having the data we need to enhance and speed up regulatory approval, ways to promote patient adherence, and for our insurance networks, way to understand the appropriate reimbursement and make sure that part is done correctly. And it's not just the clinicians and hospitals and insurance carriers. The patients derive great benefit by having more convenient care, better outcomes, and more rapid response systems there. The digital health layer is really allowing us to do some amazing things, to do combination therapy, better analytics, better outreach to patients. And as part of this, we're seeing some dramatic changes in the nature of the healthcare business, with shifting business models, with the technology titans coming in a direct-to-consumer of healthcare systems, a shifting regulatory landscape adapting to the evolution of these very powerful tools. Telemedicine is gaining traction, much more acceptable, and we're feeling much more comfortable with using technology as a layer to help support the clinical process. And we're also now, as we get better at understanding behavior and the importance of having appropriate mental health care, we're shifting our focus and being able to come up with the tools to find and make some big progress and address patient needs in that area. Now, I mentioned I would discuss very briefly some of the emerging and confluent technologies that are enabling this digital healthcare revolution. Right now, of course, with the Internet of Things, sensors are evolving, they're being interconnected. We're finding ways to collect data passively from the environment around us or actively from systems that are attached to the technology that we use or attached directly to us. And it's really quite amazing how sensor loaded our environment is, and we can leverage that to improve healthcare. We're also finding better ways of connecting through 5G and edge computing. We'll start to see some lighter weights and very powerful systems that we can use as our layers of interfacing with the technology world, with much faster and robust response times, able to do faster analytics and provide graphics in higher resolution because of the evolution of 5G. Machine learning is allowing us to look for patterns and understand and put together some very sophisticated ways of interpreting the data that we're collecting. We're coming up with new paradigms of how to look at the data. In healthcare, we're emulating what's been done for large manufacturing and machine management processes and coming up with a digital twin that incorporates all the information about an individual, their genetic information, their physiological information, their patient history, and building a digital twin of that human so that we can now say, well, what if we change this? Or what if if this surgical procedure interferes with mobility of the knee, what are the consequences of that and what are the trade-offs? So we're leveraging that digital twin paradigm. And our society is adapting and changing too, and we're getting much more comfortable with this always on, always measured environment. It has some disadvantages, of course, and some ways that sometimes it can be a bit much, but it's there and we can leverage it to improve healthcare. We're also, in terms of VR and AR technology, there's been rapid advances that allow us to do so much more. One example is OVR technologies. System to provide dimensional smells so that one can add the very powerful evocative stimulus of olfaction to our robust visual and auditory experiences. Now we have another sensory experience that can be provided in a low cost and amazingly precise manner. We're also getting better at things like our avatars. Our avatars have crossed over the uncanny valley. They can now look very much like they are real virtual humans. We'll hear a little bit more from Greg Welsh later today as he talks about using virtual humans in the healthcare arena. We can have avatars that represent us to support patient follow-up and also for us to be part of our healthcare journey, to represent us as we interact with our clinicians and colleagues in the virtual world. We're also getting better at having more complex virtual worlds with multi-user, with avatars that look realistic, have the nonverbal communication. Previously, virtual worlds were very lonely, that one would have an experience, but one would be doing it on their own. And we'll hear later today how from Adam Esslinger from Penumbra about the power of connecting people in a virtual world to have a shared virtual experience. It's really quite amazing how rapidly the technology is evolving to support multi-users in the virtual world environment. And of course, it's very important that we look out for safety and privacy, and with the evolution of systems driven by cryptocurrency, systems like blockchain that can help protect the data, keep track of access, and make sure the right people have access and the wrong people don't. With the evolution of Cleanbox as a way of keeping our technology safe and removing pathogens, we now have a way to improve the safety as we use these emerging technologies. So I'm going to shift gears now and talk very, very briefly, very top level, about the momentum that we're seeing in the XR environment. Again, VR plus virtual reality plus augmented reality and mixed reality. We're now starting to use the term immersive environments or extended reality environments, XR. So you may hear those terms throughout the course of the day. Basically, there's a spectrum of immersion that we have, with VR connoting fully immersive environments where we block out the outside world, augmented reality environments being those where we overlay the world with extra information dynamically. Mixed reality is environments where we can interact with that augmented reality layer, and extended reality or immersive systems are the terms to cover the overarching field of VR AR technology. And so it's hard to understate this, but right now the next platform that we will be using as we move forward in our social world, our entertainment world, our educational world, and our healthcare world is going to be extended reality systems. It's on the way. They're in the process of moving over from the early adopters into general use across the business enterprise. And it's going to give us some fantastic abilities to connect and to design and to support and work with each other, socialize with each other. Many companies have put tremendous resources into building up the next generation of AR and VR technologies, and I suspect at the next Consumer Electronics Show we'll see another whole raft of technologies being presented. It's building up momentum. We're still at a very early stage in terms of where we can go in the next 5 to 10 years. We're going to see fantastic surge forward. And why is this important? Why is the enterprise adopting VR and AR technology? Well, there's some unique capabilities. We can do things that otherwise we just simply cannot do. We can speed up time, go other places, have an experience on demand. These are highly functional systems that allow us to not just have an experience, but also interact and control a process, work with other people in a dynamic, robust manner. We also can personalize the experience much more than we can with typing on a computer or typing on a cell phone, to have a deeply personal experience. And we're going to return to having very important modes of communication, such as the facial expressions and body language, which has been stripped away with previous generations of technology. The adoption rate is actually pretty rapid. We're seeing very faster uptake and acceptance of VR and AR technology, even faster than the acceptance of cell phone technology or color television sets or VCR technology. And the predictions are based on parts orders and design documents and investments that there will be more than 70 million users of XR systems. As XR moves over to the enterprise, speed will pick up. And it's really all aspects of our society. We're seeing breakthrough technologies leveraging XR technologies. Healthcare, in my opinion, is going to be one of the major verticals to help pioneer the acceptance of these new technologies. So within the digital health revolution, VR and AR technologies are making a big difference. And again, it's the full stack of healthcare, prevention and wellness, much more objective assessments, functional training, improved methods to promote adherence, ways to reach underserved populations. And I'll give some examples of that as I move through here. Right now there are, and this is probably far too small number, there are more than 200 emerging medical VR and AR companies taking technologies that have been pioneered and approaches pioneered in the academic arena, translating them out into medical products. And it's almost every sector of medicine is being impacted. I've yet to find a section that we aren't seeing real breakthrough systems being developed. And it's not just the early stage academic and seed stage businesses that are moving to this arena. We're having some fantastic movement forward by some of the more progressive players in the healthcare ecosystem, with pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies such as Penumbra, really making a stand to jump into this arena and move the technology forward in a robust manner. And pioneering healthcare groups such as Hoag and Cedars-Sinai making a big difference to help move this technology forward. I'll talk very briefly now about the neuroscience of why this is important. We know that VR systems can activate changes in our brain by activating our reward systems. We can shorten the reward feedback loop by showing progress and change dynamically in a very impactful way. And we can leverage the brain's mirror neuron systems to effect change. I'll give some examples. It's necessary to activate a brain reward system in order to enable neuroplasticity. We need to have repetition in a non-boring manner, in a way that promotes novelty and promotes cognitive engagement. We have to make it interesting, engaging, and fun in order to promote adherence and have effect be in place. We also have some powerful tools using VR. For example, for exposure therapy, we can activate not just through the visual system, but we can also activate the subcortical and threat detection pathways. I suspect that Aaron Ghani later today will be going into more detail about this. But VR is much more effective to promote change through exposure therapy, address post-traumatic stress and phobias, for example, than just using our imagination alone. We can leverage the neuron systems in the brain by, for example, creating an avatar of our future self and showing how the choices we make affect our future self, but shorten the feedback loop, see it dynamically, see it in real time. We have additional mechanisms of impact. We can leverage storytelling and the ability to engage our brains cognitively in a narrative journey. Story is very important, with the ability to add characters and quests and journeys and challenges into our healthcare environment. We can leverage the power of story to help motivate people on the often difficult process of addressing their healthcare. Now, VR and AR technology has evolved. It's not something that only evolved 6 years ago when Oculus was acquired by Facebook. We've had technology, very expensive technology, very uncomfortable technology, but we've been able to do the basic research over the last 3 decades. And I got involved back in 1984 when the technology was very uncomfortable, where the computer was the size of a refrigerator. And since then, I've had the pleasure of working with some amazing colleagues who have dedicated their careers. Skip Rizzo, Joanne DeFede, Giuseppe Riva, Jeremy Bailison, Hunter Hoffman, the list goes on. Amazing, talented scientists who have been working diligently to validate and understand where VR and AR has impact on healthcare and help to move it forward. As a consequence, we have a large library of fundamental research that shows us the pathways to go down, also shows us the blind alleys that aren't as productive. So I'll jump forward and try and give some very brief examples. We'll hear from the other speakers today, further examples. We see fantastic examples of skill training using virtual environments, surgical procedure training, for example. Anatomy and physiology is a fantastic way to learn the neurotracts of the brain in a three-dimensional dynamic way. We have virtual patients for clinical skill training. Greg Welsh will be talking about that later today. This allows us to have ways to have critical conversations with patients and practice in advance so that we know how to get it right. And if we have to deliver bad news, we learn how to do that in a compassionate and empathetic way without having to learn on the job. Make sure we get that important part right. We can, for example, prepare people for very rare but possible things that can happen, such as a pediatric resuscitation emergency. We can credentialize people by using simulations to help make sure they have the skills before we put them in a situation where those skills might need to rise to the occasion to address a very difficult situation. One thing I'm very excited about is the power of VR and AR technology to provide much more objective assessments. And we'll hear more about that from the speakers later today. But we now can do much more objective assessments, challenge people how to, by creating a contextualized environment that is culturally diverse and age appropriate, ways to evoke a cognitive response. And if we can evoke a cognitive response, then we can also teach people the skills of how to manage that cognitive situation, be it an anxiety or a mood state or some other problem. And we'll hear from Charles Nduka later today about how we can capture biomarkers of cognitive emotional state and use that as a way to help dynamically assess and also intervene. I had the pleasure of collaborating with Lee Williams to look at how we can leverage VR and AR environments by combining them with functional imaging of the brain, understand the brain circuits, and link that to the response that we might get from a VR system. This allows us to identify different biotypes as we go out and can do the same type of assessment of identifying different cognitive biotypes, not just using an expensive machine, but using a virtual reality environment to evoke them. We're seeing some fantastic examples of how VR and AR technology are already in use today. We'll hear through the course of today's presentations by our experts of how they are using VR and AR. And Hoag Hospital has done a fantastic job of being the pioneer, starting with Rob Lewis, looking at ways to use VR and AR technologies for improved preoperative planning and image-guided surgery. I'm excited by the new approaches to physical therapy and occupational therapy that VR and AR allow us to have by being able to accurately measure movement, provide feedback, guide people as they go through the recovery process, and identify the best course of treatment for them. We're having fantastic progress with new ways to address difficult problems in mental health care. Almost every issue in mental health care, we found some new tools to address it. Phobias, eating disorders, psychosis, anxiety disorders, addictions, autism and Asperger, depression, attention deficit disorder, a very long list of where we found some very powerful tools. And we'll hear today from Beth Darnell and others how VR is being used for both addressing acute and addressing chronic pain. We've made great strides of coming up with new tools to address post-traumatic stress disorder and phobias, anxiety disorders through the power of exposure therapy. And very excitingly, we now have some new tools to help address addictions by having environments that are evocative of cravings. We can do refusal skill training, risk avoidance training, and situational confidence training, and help people understand what to say and how to react when their cravings are stimulated or when they're under peer pressure. We can use virtual hospital tours as a way to reduce pre-procedure anxiety. And getting back to my concern about an aging population and the challenges that we have there, we've come up with some fantastic ways to address senior isolation and promote connectiveness and promote health and wellness in our senior care population. Rob, I suspect I'm getting close to my time limit. I have a few more slides to show, but I think I'll wrap it up and make sure we have enough time for the rest of of our speakers. Thank you so much for having given me the opportunity to talk about the topics that I'm very passionate about, and I look forward to hearing from you and from the remainder of the speakers.
Thanks so much, Walter. I mean, I've heard you speak a dozen times now, and every time I listen to you, I learn something new. So, we're really grateful to have you here as part of the team and
Well, you
and
better
the
be
field.
you better be careful with that, Rob. If you hear it too many times, I'm going to have to start asking you to give the talk for me. We'll play that.
I did have a question that I just kind of wanted to pose to you real quickly. If you had to pick one thing, one area, one condition, or a group of conditions where you think the benefit of virtual reality is most imminently available, what would that be?
Oh, Rob, I'm going to have to give you two. I mean, it's
Okay.
hard. It's hard to
Okay.
narrow down so many areas to just one. So if we can compromise, I'll give you two. I think I'm most excited about how we're finally going to have some new tools for objective assessments. Often in the course of healthcare, we have to ask people, how are you doing? Are you able to move better? Are you able to manage your mood and your depression, your anxiety better? How were you last week? How are you now? And it's so difficult to come up with objective measurements in that zone, but finally we have the tools to do that. And I guess I'm also excited about some of the new advances in physical therapy, occupational therapy, and supporting people as they do their recovery from injury at home. So those are the two out of many that I'll choose to answer your question.
Great. Thanks so much, Walter.